He wasn't just a king. He was something else, something harder to explain. Solomon's the kind of figure who feels too big for history, a man whose name shows up in holy texts, magical grimoires, and whispered legends. People say he was blessed by God, that he ruled over one of the greatest kingdoms in ancient Israel, that his wisdom was unmatched. But that's only part of the story. Because there are other stories, strange ones in fact. Stories about a ring engraved with the name of God, about demons forced to build his temple, about beasts, spirits, even the wind bending to his will. They say his throne moved on its own, that he could speak with birds, that he wasn't just a ruler of men, but of angels and demons too. And somehow, it all stuck. Solomon became more than a historical king. He became something mythic. A man remembered in scripture, yes, but also in the dark corners of magic and mysticism. He's tied to the building of the temple, the writing of Proverbs, and the binding of 72 demons. So what's the truth? Was he just a wise king with a good story? Or did Solomon know something, see something, that we're still not supposed to understand? This is the full story of King Solomon, the wisest man, the richest king, and the subduer of demons. Solomon was born into a world already tangled in scandal, power struggles, and prophecy. His father, David, was no ordinary man. A shepherd turned warrior, a king anointed by God, but also a man who made enemies, mistakes, and one fateful decision that would change everything. That decision was Bathsheba. She was the wife of another man, Uriah, a loyal soldier. David saw her, wanted her, and took her. And when Bathsheba became pregnant, David tried to cover it up. Eventually, he sent Uriah to the front lines and ensured he wouldn't come back. It was a dark chapter in David's life, one that nearly tore the throne apart. And yet, out of that brokenness came Solomon. The child was born under a cloud of controversy, but in time, something shifted. The prophet Nathan, who once rebuked David for his sin, became the same voice that would later declare Solomon the chosen one, a child of divine purpose, a second chance. From a young age, Solomon stood out, not with loud ambition or brute strength, but with a quiet kind of clarity. People said he had the bearing of a king before he even wore the crown. Tall, calm, with sharp, thoughtful eyes that seemed to read the room before anyone else had even spoken. He wasn't flashy, he didn't chase the spotlight, but when he spoke, people listened. And while Solomon's birth was foretold by prophecy, his rise wasn't guaranteed. As David aged, the court turned into a battlefield of whispers and rival claims. David's other son, Adonijah, declared himself king while David was still alive. He had the backing of generals, priests, and men who'd fought beside his father, but not everyone. Bathsheba moved quickly. So did Nathan. Together, they reminded David of his promise, that Solomon, not Adonijah, was the true heir. And in a rare, final act of clarity, David made his will known. Solomon was crowned while his father still lived, an unusual move meant to silence any challenge. The ceremony was rushed, but powerful. Trumpets blared, the people shouted, "Long live King Solomon!" And just like that, a teenager stepped into one of the most powerful thrones in the ancient world. He didn't seize power. He didn't fight for it. He was chosen by prophecy, by politics, and, as the story goes, by God himself. But Solomon's reign was only just beginning, and in the quiet after the ceremony, he must have known. Wisdom alone wouldn't be enough. Not in a kingdom this fragile. Not with the weight of giants on his shoulders. Not long after Solomon was crowned, the kingdom waited to see what kind of king he would become. He was young, unproven, inheriting the throne of a father who had lived a life full of war, bloodshed, and victory. David had conquered his enemies and built a legacy that loomed over everything. And Solomon's job was to hold it all together and somehow make it better. So Solomon did what many kings might not. He traveled to a place called Gibeon, not to make war, not to build an alliance, but to pray. Back then, Gibeon was home to one of the most important altars in the land, and it was there, after offering 1,000 sacrifices, that Solomon laid down and had a dream. But this wasn't just any dream. According to the story, God himself appeared, and he asked a simple question. Ask what I shall give you. Imagine that. You're the new king. The weight of a nation is on your shoulders, and God, the creator of the universe, gives you a blank check. Most rulers might have asked for power, long life, wealth, victory over enemies. Solomon didn't. He said, "Give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil." Not power, not revenge, just wisdom. And in that moment, everything changed. God was pleased, not just with the request, but with the heart behind it. So he gave Solomon what he asked for, and then gave him everything else too. Wealth, honor, long life, on the condition he stayed faithful. When Solomon woke up, it wasn't just a dream, it was a turning point. And when word got out, the people began to see their young king differently. Not just as a prince placed on the throne, but as a man chosen for something greater. It didn't take long for Solomon's wisdom to become more than a rumor. One day, 2 women came to the court. They lived in the same house, both had recently given birth, but only one child had survived. Now, both women were claiming to be the baby's mother. No witnesses, no proof, just grief and accusation. It was the kind of case that could break a judge, but Solomon didn't hesitate. He called for a sword, and he gave an order: cut the child in 2, give half to each woman. One woman agreed, the other cried out, "No, give her the baby, just don't kill him." And just like that, Solomon had his answer. He gave the child to the woman who had begged for its life, because only a real mother would rather lose her son than see him harmed. It was brutal, simple, and brilliant. Word of that ruling spread like wildfire. People didn't just respect Solomon, they were stunned by him. His ability to see through lies, to understand the heart behind the words. It felt like something more than human, and from that moment on, his reputation became legend. But Solomon's wisdom wasn't just about clever rulings. He was a writer, a thinker, a speaker who could turn truth into poetry. He spoke of ants and eagles, of kings and fools, of love, time, life, and death. He's credited with writing Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs, texts that would be quoted for thousands of years. Leaders from distant lands came to hear him speak, not for trade deals or alliances, just to hear his thoughts. He became the living embodiment of divine insight, a symbol of order in a world full of chaos. Under Solomon, Israel began to shine, not just with gold and stone, but with ideas. People started to believe this kingdom, this small, unlikely place, was touched by something greater. That maybe, just maybe, they were sitting at the heart of something sacred. But as the crowds grew and his name spread across continents, something else began to rise. Expectation. Because the wisest man on earth was now expected to build something even greater than his father's kingdom. A symbol, a monument, a resting place for the divine. And so, Solomon set his eyes on something his father had only dreamed of. Under Solomon's rule, Israel didn't just survive, it thrived. For the first time in generations, the kingdom wasn't at war. There were no sieges to repel, no enemies at the gates. Instead, Solomon used the calm to build, both literally and figuratively. And what followed was something rare in ancient history: peace that actually produced prosperity. He expanded trade like no king before him. Ships were sent across the Mediterranean, deep into Africa, and even toward the Indian Ocean. Gold, silver, spices, exotic animals, everything flowed into Jerusalem. Solomon taxed trade routes, controlled alliances, and made Israel the link between empires. And he didn't just collect wealth, he showed it off. Solomon built palaces, gardens, towers, stables for thousands of horses and chariots. His court was filled with singers, scholars, scribes, and advisors. Imported cedar from Lebanon lined his halls. Gold became so common in Jerusalem, they say silver was considered nearly worthless. He is often considered the richest man in history, with the wealth of a trillionaire by today's standards. But it wasn't just the economy that grew, it was influence. Solomon was no stranger to political marriages. The most famous was his union with the daughter of Pharaoh, a marriage that shocked traditionalists but sent a message across the ancient world. Israel had arrived. Nations that once looked down on this desert kingdom now sent gifts, envoys, and tribute. Some out of respect, others out of fear. Because the combination of wealth, wisdom, and divine favor made Solomon look untouchable. He unified the tribes, stabilized the borders, and brought a kind of cultural flowering that hadn't been seen since the days of Egypt and Babylon. Art, architecture, music, law, it all bloomed under his reign. But for all the gold and glory, there was still one thing left to do. Something his father, King David, had longed for, but never accomplished. A permanent home for God. The temple. And Solomon wasn't going to just build it, he was going to make it the most sacred place on earth. For generations, the presence of God had moved from place to place, dwelling in a tent, carried across deserts, pitched beside battlefields. It was sacred, yes, but temporary, and David had wanted more. He dreamed of a permanent home for the Ark of the Covenant, a house worthy of God himself. But David was a man of war, a man with blood on his hands. So that task fell to Solomon, and he didn't treat it like just another construction project. He treated it like destiny. Solomon reached out to Hiram, the king of Tyre, a longtime ally of David. Hiram sent cedar trees from Lebanon, the finest wood in the ancient world, along with master craftsmen and stonemasons. Tens of thousands of workers were enlisted. Stones were quarried and shaped so precisely that by the time they arrived at the site, not a single hammer or chisel was heard during the temple's assembly. Everything was built in silence. The layout was deliberate. The outer courts, the holy place, and at the heart of it all, the Holy of Holies. That inner chamber was where the Ark of the Covenant would rest, a space no man could enter, except the high priest once a year, under strict ritual. The walls were lined with gold. Carvings of palm trees, cherubim, and open flowers were everywhere. Massive golden cherubim were positioned over the ark, their wings stretching wall to wall. The entire structure glowed in the sun, a reflection of Solomon's vision, a physical dwelling place for the divine. When the time came to dedicate it, Solomon stood before the people and offered a prayer, not just for Israel, but for foreigners, for future generations, even for those in exile. He wasn't just building a monument, he was anchoring the faith of a nation. And then, it happened. According to the account, fire fell from heaven. Smoke filled the temple. The priests couldn't even enter, and the people dropped to their knees, faces to the ground, as the presence of God settled into the house built for him. It was a moment that marked the peak of Solomon's reign. A king at the height of his power, a nation united, and a temple that would stand for centuries as the spiritual center of the world. But while the people marveled at what had been built above ground, there were other stories. Stories about what or who had helped build it from below. The temple may have been the crown jewel of Solomon's kingdom, but the throne was its beating heart. It wasn't just a seat, it was a statement, a symbol of authority, justice, and something else entirely. Something harder to name. Descriptions of Solomon's throne come from a mix of history, legend, and old-world imagination, but they all agree on one thing. It was like nothing the ancient world had ever seen. Built from ivory and overlaid with gold, the throne sat atop 6 rising steps. On each step stood carved lions, 12 in total, 6 on each side, watching with silent, frozen power. At the top, beside the king himself, were two more lions, larger and more imposing, flanking the seat of judgment. But it didn't stop there. Later traditions, especially from Jewish, Islamic, and Persian sources, say the throne wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. Not literally, perhaps, but in ways that blurred the line between craftsmanship and something more. They say the throne had moving parts, that mechanical birds would scatter incense, that golden beasts would bow, that when Solomon approached, the throne would rise to meet him, and when he sat, it would whisper the laws of judgment into his ear. Some claimed it could even judge liars on its own. There are stories of men who lied in Solomon's court, only to have the throne react. Steps collapsing, lions roaring, the guilty falling into hidden pits. Whether those tales are symbolic or something stranger is left to interpretation. But the message was clear. Solomon didn't rule by brute force. He ruled through wisdom, law, and divine order. And the throne wasn't just furniture, it was a reflection of that divine justice. A fusion of kingly power and sacred responsibility. In time, the legend of that throne spread far beyond Israel. In Islamic tradition, it became one of the wonders gifted to Solomon by God. In later magical texts, it became a seat not only of law, but of command over spirits. A tool through which Solomon could issue decrees not just to men, but to beings from other realms. And those stories about the other beings under his rule were just beginning to surface. Because while Solomon sat upon the throne of judgment above ground, what he ruled beneath the surface was something far more dangerous.
Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story.
For all his power and wealth, Solomon's fame didn't just stay within the borders of Israel. Word of his wisdom traveled far, beyond deserts, across seas, into the courts of kings and queens who'd never so much as seen a Hebrew scroll. One of them was a queen. We don't know her real name. History remembers her simply as the Queen of Sheba, a powerful monarch from the wealthy kingdoms of the south, likely in the regions of modern-day Ethiopia or Yemen. Her land was rich in incense, gold, and trade. She didn't need anything from Solomon, but she came anyway. Not for alliance, not for conquest, but to test him. She arrived in Jerusalem with a grand caravan, camels, gold, spices, precious stones, and attendants. A royal display meant to impress. And yet, from the moment she stepped into Solomon's court, the story shifted. Because she wasn't just there to admire him, she came with riddles, hard ones, tricky ones. The kind that weren't just clever games, but questions wrapped in meaning. She wanted to see if this so-called wisest man on earth was as sharp as the rumors claimed. And he was. Solomon answered every challenge, calmly and without hesitation. Some say he not only solved her riddles, but revealed truths about her that even she hadn't spoken aloud. The queen was stunned, not just by his intellect, but by the way his wisdom was woven into everything. His court, his servants, the temple, even the way food was served. She said, "The stories I heard didn't do you justice." And then she gave her tribute. Gold, rare spices, unheard of treasures, and left with a new respect for Israel and its king. But that's not where every version ends. In the Ethiopian Bible and tradition, the Queen of Sheba was more than just a visitor. She and Solomon became lovers. And from that union came a son, Menelik I, a child who would one day return to Jerusalem, take the Ark of the Covenant, and bring it to Ethiopia, where some believe it still rests today, hidden and protected. That single story became the cornerstone of Ethiopia's Solomonic dynasty, a bloodline that claimed divine descent through Solomon himself, a fusion of legend, royalty, and prophecy that would ripple through African history for centuries. Whether you believe the child was born or not, one thing is clear. Even the most powerful queen of her time crossed deserts just to meet him. And still, even that wasn't the strangest part of Solomon's reign. Because while kings and queens came bearing gifts, something else was building the temple, something not entirely human. There's the Solomon of Scripture, wise, wealthy, chosen by God. And then there's the other Solomon, the one you don't hear about in Sunday school. The stories come from a strange place, the Testament of Solomon, a text that surfaced centuries after his death. It's not biblical canon, it's not history, but it feels old, like something passed down in whispers, a record of secrets someone was never supposed to write down. In this version, Solomon is more than a king. He's a man caught between two worlds, divine order above and something darker below. It begins with a demon, a spirit named Ornias, who tormented a young boy working on the temple. Every night, Ornias would steal the boy's vitality, draining his life just enough to keep him suffering. No one could stop it, until Solomon prayed. In answer, God, or in some versions, the archangel Michael, sent Solomon a ring, not just any ring, a signet engraved with the name of God, a symbol of divine authority. With it, Solomon had power over demons. He summoned Ornias and bound him with the ring, but instead of destroying him, Solomon interrogated him. He wanted to know how demons worked, what they feared, where they came from, what purpose they served. And that's how the real strangeness begins, because Ornias started talking. One by one, Solomon summoned more spirits, some with wings, some with animal heads, some made of smoke and fire. They told him their names, their powers, the stars they were tied to. They revealed the sins they fed on, the ailments they caused, the people they tormented. Asmodeus, Beelzebub, Abazethebu. Dozens of them, hundreds depending on the version. Solomon didn't just fight these spirits, he used them. With the ring, he bound them into labor. He forced demons to cut stone, move materials, polish gold. The temple wasn't just built by human hands. According to these stories, it was built by spirits under divine command. Each demon he bound, he recorded name, symbol, domain, and method of control, a catalog of the unseen. And he didn't stop there. He trapped the most dangerous ones in vessels of brass or sealed them beneath the earth. In some versions, he even passed their secrets down, etched into scrolls or hidden within magical texts, meant only for those with the authority to wield them. But over time, those texts would resurface. Pieces of them would leak into magical traditions. The lines between history, mysticism, and occultism began to blur. And from that blur, a new kind of legend would be born. Because if this testament was real, Solomon wasn't just a wise king. He was the first demonologist. Long after Solomon's death, the stories didn't stop. They evolved. The tales of his power over demons drifted through centuries and across cultures, picked up by mystics, alchemists, and occult scholars who weren't just curious. They were obsessed. Somewhere in the shadows of medieval Europe, those whispers began to take form. This was no dusty scroll of wisdom. It was a manual, a grimoire, a step-by-step guide to invoking the 72 demons Solomon was said to have bound during the construction of the temple. Spirits like Baal, Paimon, Buer, and Vasigo, each with a title, a symbol, and a precise ritual of summoning. Their powers ranged from the strange to the terrifying. Some could teach languages, reveal hidden treasures, or predict the future. Others stirred love, caused illness, or bent the will of kings. Each demon had its own personality, its own domain, and its own weakness. The legend says Solomon sealed them all inside a brass vessel, trapping them with magic symbols and divine names. Then he buried it, or cast it into a deep lake. The location? No one agrees. But every version ends the same. They were meant to stay locked away. But curiosity has never been humanity's strong suit. Over the centuries, that knowledge resurfaced, bits of it copied into secret books, translated, reinterpreted. The Lemegeton, a 17th century grimoire, claimed direct ties to Solomon's magical texts, and at the heart of it sat the Ars Goetia, a catalog of the 72 spirits, the seals to summon them, and the commands to control them. And at the center of it all was the Seal of Solomon, two interlocked triangles, what most people now recognize as the Star of David, said to be the key to binding spiritual forces. In the occult world, it wasn't a symbol of national identity. It was a weapon, a blueprint for command. So, was any of it real? That depends on who you ask. But one thing is certain, the myth of Solomon didn't fade with time. It grew. He became a kind of magical archetype, the sorcerer king, the master of angels and demons, the man who knew how to walk the line between light and darkness and stay standing. And the books that carried his name? They were just getting started. For a man remembered as the wisest who ever lived, it's no surprise that countless books would be tied to his name. But not all of them were sermons or psalms. Some weren't even spiritual in the way most people think. They were manuals, guides, blueprints for power. Across medieval Europe and the Islamic world, texts began surfacing, each claiming to hold the hidden knowledge of King Solomon. Some said they were passed down by his scribes, others claimed they were discovered in secret vaults, written in languages long forgotten. All of them shared a single hook. These weren't just stories. They were instructions. One of the most famous was the Clavicula Salomonis, or the Key of Solomon. It wasn't a religious text, it was a grimoire, a book of spells, rituals, and protections. The kind of book you didn't leave lying around. Inside were conjurations, planetary influences, talismans, and ritual tools, all said to be revealed by Solomon himself. Then came the Lemegeton, which we touched on briefly, a larger collection of magical writings that included the Ars Goetia, along with other sections like the Ars Goetia, Ars Paulina, and Ars Almadel. Together they formed a kind of magical system attributed to the man who once commanded demons to build the temple. And it didn't stop there. There were the Hygromantia, the magical treatise of Solomon, the 6th and 7th books of Moses, all circling around the same idea, that Solomon had unlocked something, a secret layer of reality, a way to command not just physical elements, but spiritual ones. Most historians don't believe Solomon actually wrote these books. They were likely written hundreds, even thousands of years after his death. But that didn't matter to those who used them. What mattered was the name. Solomon gave the books authority, gravity, power. He became more than a king. He became a symbol. To mystics and magicians, he was the original gatekeeper of divine knowledge, the first man to crack the code between heaven and earth. His name appeared in Christian texts, Jewish folklore, Islamic hadith, and Renaissance magic. Everyone wanted a piece of his legend. And whether or not the books were real, their influence was, because the legacy they carried would shape ceremonial magic, occult philosophy, and esoteric traditions for centuries. And through it all, the question still lingered. How much of it was myth? And how much did Solomon actually know? For years, Solomon's reign was unmatched. Peace reigned, wealth flowed. His name carried weight from the shores of Africa to the cities of Mesopotamia. He was wise, respected, and, by all appearances, favored by God. But even the wisest man on earth was still a man. And over time, the cracks began to show. Solomon had a weakness, one the scriptures don't soften or explain away. He loved women, and not just a few. According to the old accounts, he took 700 wives and 300 concubines. Many of them were foreign, princesses from distant lands brought into his household to seal alliances and strengthen political ties. But these weren't just marriages of convenience. They brought their cultures, their customs, and their gods. Solomon didn't stop them. In fact, he built shrines for them, altars for Chemosh, Molech, Astarte, and other foreign deities. High places on hills where incense was burned and sacrifices were made, not to the God who gave him wisdom, but to gods who demanded other forms of devotion. This wasn't just personal failure, it was national betrayal. The man who built the temple was now building other temples. The king who once prayed for wisdom had begun to forget where it came from. And God noticed. According to the story, the Lord appeared to Solomon one final time, not with a blessing, but a warning. Because Solomon's heart had turned, the kingdom would be torn apart, not during his lifetime, but through his son. The price would be paid in blood, civil war, and division. For a man who had started with such promise, it was a quiet kind of tragedy. He wasn't overthrown, he wasn't struck down, he just faded, drifting further from the light he once carried. And when he finally died, after a reign that lasted 40 years, the kingdom was already fragile. The golden age was ending, and the world Solomon built, brilliant, strange, and sacred, was beginning to unravel. Solomon died quietly. No war, no rebellion, no final act of grandeur, just the slow passing of a king who had seen more, ruled more, and known more than any man before him. He was buried in Jerusalem among his ancestors, and for a moment the world held its breath, because what followed wasn't peace, but fracture. His son, Rehoboam, inherited the throne, but not the wisdom. When challenged by the northern tribes over heavy taxation, Rehoboam responded with arrogance and cruelty. What should have been a moment of unity became a breaking point. 10 of the 12 tribes revolted. The kingdom split in two. Israel in the north, Judah in the south. The golden age was over, and Solomon's legacy became a warning as much as a memory. But even in ruin, he was never forgotten. To the faithful, Solomon remains a king touched by God. Flawed, yes, but chosen. A man who built the temple, spoke with angels, and asked for wisdom when he could have asked for anything. To mystics, he is something else entirely. A figure who unlocked the secrets of the unseen, who commanded spirits, wore the seal of divine authority, and left behind books that still whisper in candlelit rooms. And to others, he's a riddle. A king who balanced the sacred and the forbidden, who knew the names of demons, yet prayed with a poet's heart. A man who started in purity and ended in compromise. But maybe that's what makes Solomon so lasting. He wasn't perfect, he was powerful, brilliant, deeply human, and deeply conflicted. And in that tension, his legend found its strength. His name still echoes through temples, mosques, churches, and magical circles alike. A man who ruled not just people, but forces we still struggle to understand.